Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Linda Bermudez, and I'm the K14 Technical Assistance Provider for the Los Angeles region. Thank you for joining us today for our our second professional development for the fall season. Today with us is Kim Irons, who is our pathway coordinator for El Camino. She'll be leading the professional development today, as well as Colleen Maldilano, who is from El Camino College, and we'll be discussing the structuring of pathways with you. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Kim.
All right, let me share my screen and we'll get started. All right, welcome everyone. So today we're going to be looking at systems for developing and implementing K14 career pathways. I'm Kim Irons, and Colleen.
I'm Colleen Maldonado, and I am at El Camino College as the K14 Career Pathways Coordinator. And I often joke that Kim and I are like two sides of the same coin, which has really been great.
So while we kind of introduce ourselves, if you could type into the chat, I know most of the faces we know, but into the chat, if you could type your name, your role or position, and then what institution you're at, so we can kind of get an idea of who's in our room. And then with that, so as Colleen said, she and I kind of see ourselves as two sides of the same coin. So I'm the on the K-12 side. My background is all K-12. I started as a high school teacher in a pathway. So I have about 20 years or so in pathways. I've also been an administrator of an early college high school. So I've got a lot of the dual enrollment side too. And then the last 6 years, I've been working exclusively with career pathways.
And I work at El Camino College. Like Kim, I have a very long background in partnerships between K-12 and community colleges. And I love this work. I've really been excited about delving deep into the CTE side. So I have been a director of student outreach and recruitment at Long Beach City College, spent about 12 years in the CSU system as a director of a California Student Opportunity and Access program. But like I said, you know, the first beginning of my career was all about transfer and going straight to the university. And the last, I'd say about 8 years has switched over to CTE, which has been incredibly exciting just because of the opportunities in this area. So I've been loving it. It's the kind of work that I love to do. So I've been at El Camino for about 3 years now as the Career Pathways Coordinator.
All right. So today we're going to kind of look at the pathway building process. We're going to look at the 4 stages of career pathway development. We're going to look at how labor market comes into play in all of the stages. There's a specific workshop on getting the labor market data, but we're going to talk about kind of when and how you're going to use it. And then just kind of walking through the different stages. Throughout this, we're going to give you some resources that you can use in pathway mapping yourself, resources that have been developed through our partnership and also with in collaboration with Career Ladders Project. So we're going to give those to you and share those so you can take them, use them, modify them, do what you will with them, but at least you'll have some things to take away with you. And our goals for today, hopefully by the end of this, you'll kind of have an improved understanding of how labor market data is used in the various stages. You'll also kind of have a better understanding of pathway maps, how they're used and how they're created. And then we're going to give you kind of time and space to develop your own career action plan through this process. All right, so the first question that we want to look at before we get started on developing a career pathway is, what exactly is a career pathway? We didn't want to assume anyone's background, so we're just going to kind of briefly go through, because again, something that Colleen and I have noticed in our history of working together is that K-12 and the community college side don't always have the same definition behind the same words. So we want to just make sure that we're all on the same page with what is a K-14 pathway when we're talking about it. So the first thing to notice is that a K14 pathway is more than just a sequence of courses. A course sequence is great and is oftentimes the start of a pathway, but it is not in and of itself a career pathway. So a career pathway is on the K-12 side, it's 2 or more courses in the CTE umbrella, somewhere between the 7th and 12th grade, right? So that's on the K-12 side. It includes a concentrator and a capstone. So you can have more than 2 years, that's great, but you want to have at least 2 of those years with the concentrator and the capstone to be considered a pathway. And what makes a pathway more than just a course sequence is that it includes or incorporates work-based learning and student support opportunities. So you're really stretching outside of just the classroom-based experiences, but you're making it a well-rounded experience with those work-based learning opportunities and student supports. It should align to an identified pathway within an industry sector. And it should align to something that's happening at the community college, hopefully your partner community college, right? You want to be able to keep it local and you want to have that partnership. So that way the pathway that begins somewhere in the K-12 should be aligned to something that students can continue on at their local community college partner. So there should be that alignment in the programs between the K-12 and the community college side. So when we're talking about a pathway, like these are the components that we're looking at, and these are all of the aspects that we incorporate when we talk about a K-14 career pathway. So in developing a pathway, there's 4 stages. We look at it kind of as a circle because pathways are always evolving, they're always growing. We're always revising, editing, adding to our pathways. As industries change, as technologies change, right, we need to make sure that we're keeping all of that. So it's not a once around the circle and then done kind of process. It is something that we continuously go around the circle. So we start with our pathway development, which is where labor market data is really kind of the first step in this, and looking to see, you know, what's growing, what's of interest, what's there. Looking at our existing pathways, you might have some pathways that exist that are hidden that you haven't tapped into. And then really identifying your resources and capacities. Next is looking at the alignment process, aligning to both industry and partners, including your community college partner. The pathway implementation, which sounds like the hardest part, but really in this process that's when you're putting it into action. And so it's really just kind of, that's where the problem solving comes in, and being able to kind of pivot and look at things. And then looking at your pathway improvement, what is the data telling you about what's happening? What needs maybe aren't being met? And then what can you do to assess them? And that usually kind of takes you back into that development where you start to fill some holes or make some adjustments, and then kind of continue the cycle through. All right, so with our pathway development at the beginning, there's 3 key pieces to keep in mind. The first one is labor market data, and really looking at what are the high demand, high wage, high growth local industries. So you want to make sure that you're preparing students for careers that they're able to pursue without having to leave your community. You want to really look at what's going on locally. It's key to kind of note that when it says high demand, high wage, that's not always high demand in terms of student interest, right? This is really focusing on the labor market and what's high demand on the industry side. And so that can sometimes be a barrier on students. And so we're going to talk about kind of navigating that a little bit, but really looking at what the labor market data is telling you. We don't want to be setting students up for careers that don't exist, right? So we want to make sure that if we're training students for entering the workforce, that we're training them and that they're going to have jobs to go into, and that the jobs will be there and waiting for them once the student is trained and ready. Existing pathways, we really want to look to see what's already there, right? What are students currently enrolling in on both the K-12 and the community college side? Where's the student interest? Is it something that could already potentially be a pathway that maybe we just need to do a little bit of tweaking? Or is it something that we could maybe turn into a pathway? So kind of looking at the structures and the things that we already have in place, and then looking at our resources and capacity. So again, what do we already have? What do we have the capacity for? Staffing is a big one that comes into play here. And so kind of keeping that in mind when we're talking about resources and capacity. And then also looking at what are some ways that we could leverage increasing our pathways possibly.
So in terms of labor market and how we use that kind of data, really it's at every stage of the process: development, implementation, improvement. So in the beginning, you're really looking at identifying what those high growth, high wage industries are. So a lot of times at the college side, I will have K-12 come and be very interested and say that, we want to do this kind of pathway, and not to, maybe it's fashion because they have a lot of student interest. It's exciting. We know we're going to have students are going to be interested in this, but then we really have to step back and say, all right, let's look at the data. Where are the high growth? Is where are jobs that are going to pay well, and there will be lots of jobs when students come out, so they have opportunities. And so then we look at, well, using that data, now that we kind of know where that demand, right, and those high wage jobs are, what kinds of industries, maybe we look at something different at your school, not just the popular things, but maybe let's build on something you have. Right. So if the K-12 has a pathway, which is always my favorite way to go, is to look at what academies or pathways a school already has. And then how can the college come in there, right? But to really focus in on those pathways where there's big opportunities, perhaps to add something new or supplement what they have going on. But also, what are some new jobs that are out there, right? What are things that are not even existing in K-12 or community colleges? Where are we trying to move into? So for instance, maybe something in cloud computing is not something that's on the radar screen at a lot of schools. And I really had to dive deep so I would understand that industry. But when I show the labor market information and show the incredible demand and the fact that there are not a lot of people have that specialized training, that builds a lot of excitement to move into something new that really nice. It's just such a new industry or career. To me, the industry input and partnerships is key at every stage. I really think this is something we miss a lot of times, is that we don't invite industry at the development stage. We don't invite them at the very beginning when we're first sitting down to really look at a pathway and begin to identify how we are going to structure it and what pieces need to be part of that. And having industry at the table at the very beginning, not only does it build the buy-in, but it helps us kind of adjust and make sure that we are aligning the programs we're creating with what the needs are. And so you can do that in a lot of different ways. We want to encourage them to do work-based learning opportunities. Maybe we start small with asking, our industry partners to be speakers, or even to do a virtual tour kind of thing, and then kind of build that kind of, as we've developed the relationship, begin to ask and have them at the table for our advisory boards to do, things that are a little more commitment when we're back in person, maybe job shadowing days and other work-based learning, possibly even internships. But we don't try to hit them with everything at once. We want to involve them at every stage and really make them feel like full partners, not just to invite them to an advisory committee. And do that. And so the labor market data is it's key because it identifies where we want to move. So for instance, I have got an example. I have a huge Project Lead the Way engineering pathway at El Camino. About 1,200 students at 9 schools. Before the pandemic, we had like 55 course sections. And most high schools have an engineering pathway. We've been pushing STEM really, really hard for a lot of years. And so the assumption was, well, there's going to be a lot of jobs out there for students, right? That's, I mean, I helped to run a middle school STEM program, right? But then when we pulled out the labor market data using some of the regional reports, suddenly I'm faced with the fact that it has an overall -3% growth, -3%. I'm like, what? Wait a minute. We're preparing all these students, telling them all to become engineers. But then using some of the regional reports that have been done out there to dive a little down and see where are the opportunities. So we were able to look and see that in our region, in the South Bay region, aerospace is huge, right? We have some huge employers in our backyard, right? And that electrical and electronics engineering is a big high growth area. And so we just look at how do we adjust the programs that we have to meet the jobs that are out there. So, and where do we get all that data? Like, where do we go for it? And you're going to have another labor market data to really go in deep on the 24th. So coming up, I really encourage this because there's a lot of sources out there. And a lot of times it's hard to know where to go for what kind of information. So for me, when I'm talking to a school, or I'm talking to a student, or I'm trying to encourage, but kind of on an individual level, my first go-to is always the one at the bottom. For us, it's Career Coach, which is based on the EMSI data, which is regional. So I am able to look at what are careers that are growing in my region, right? Because other sources like ONET Online may give me California data or give me national data, but that doesn't mean a whole lot in LA County, right? What's going on in my own community? And so that's kind of very easy data to look at. It's easy to share with students and parents and schools because it really gives me salary information. What does that job do, right? And it even shows the growth projections. And that's really important because most of us don't know where to find that kind of labor market projections on whether it's going down or up. But when I'm working with partners or we're doing pathway development, the ones on the top for the Center for Competitive Workforce and the Centers for Excellence, and even the LAEDC are three resources where I can get more in-depth data on a particular industry. So as they come up with new reports that are very detailed, we can actually use that data right at the start of pathway development. So for instance, I got a report on regional data on engineering, right? That's where I was able to find out what aspects in engineering, what are those sub-careers under there that are in high growth, right? Not just looking at the general industry topic, the overall industry, but digging down into what are the jobs or the specializations under that field where the growth is at. And so those kinds of research reports and everything that you can get from the Centers of Excellence or the other two sources have been great. The other thing I like with the LAEDC is they do a regular kind of industry update, what's going on in LA County. That's helped me in some cases really see growth in construction. Again, another huge growth area in our area. And so I will attend special events, regional events on industry kind of things that are either in a industry I'm kind of trying to learn something new about. So it's a potential pathway, or it relates directly to an industry pathway that I already have. So those kinds of events, always keep your eyes open for that. And a lot of times I know that kind of our technical support will push down information about those different kinds of industry events where you can get more labor market and workforce trends. You'll find out a lot more about what kind of data you can get in these different sources, but these are the ones that I use usually.
And I'll just say, as a K-12 person, labor market data is not my strength or my wheelhouse. And so I've really kind of learned to lean on my community college partner, because the community colleges tend to be much more tapped into the labor market data. And so that's something, if you're on the K-12 side and labor market data is newer to you, or it's something that you're not as comfortable, ask your community college partner, because they do work much more in an involved way with labor market data, and can really kind of help fill some of those gaps that you might have on the K-12 side.
Yeah, I agree. That's one of the areas I think we can bring to a partnership.
All right, so now kind of into what the pathway looks like, or once it starts to take shape. So you've looked at the labor market data, and maybe you've kind of identified some areas of high growth, high wage that might be of interest. Then you want to kind of tap into existing pieces. So looking on the high school side, do you have something that could be expanded? Do you already have a course sequence? So maybe you have a computer science course sequence that currently is running as just computer science electives. Could that be something that could be kind of converted into a full pathway? Or do you have, maybe you have a woodshop class that it's offering, one elective of woodshop. Is that something that could be taken into and expanded upon? So really looking for those existing opportunities that are there, and maybe seeing, do you have some hidden pathways that already exist? Maybe you have some course sequences that are already there that you could just do a little adding onto, or kind of bolstering up and converting that into a full-blown pathway, but it's just been hiding and operating as electives currently. Right. So really kind of taking stock of what you have. And then one of the key things that that I like this graphic for, because it really shows, is that when we're looking at pathways and designing the K14 pathway all the way through, one of the things to keep in mind is looking for what we call on and off ramps. And so they're places where students can exit the pathway into the workforce, and then places where students can maybe exit the workforce and go back into schooling to level up, or maybe level up in schooling while they're in the workforce. And so when we look at it and kind of block it out this way, it shows us where there's natural on and off ramps, where at the end of high school, there's a natural off ramp, right? There's a place where students can choose either to continue on in the education or to go into the workforce. If you've set up your career pathway in a way that is kind of meeting those requirements to where they've got those 2 or more years, they've got that capstone course, hopefully you've done some work-based learning, you've set up a pathway where at the high school level, after graduating from high school, students have the ability to enter into that career if they choose, or they can continue on with the alignment of that pathway at the community college level. And so we have those on and off ramps. Or you might have a student who leaves and goes into the workforce, and after a year or two realizes, hey, I need that certificate if I want to get to that next level, I want the promotion. You've got that kind of laid out for them. So the student knows where that pathway goes, and it kind of serves as a roadmap for students, for counselors, for administrators, for parents, for everyone involved, to kind of see where those different levels are and where you can get off and come back in. And I would stress that the on-ramps are really important, because I think anyone who's worked with students long enough knows that once students kind of exit and go off on an off-ramp, getting back in is really hard. And so if you've made that really clear in that pathway process, that these are the points where you can jump back in at any time and level up, it makes it so that students have that knowledge and are able to come back in a little bit easier and smoother. Also, when they're coming back in and maybe entering a new institution like a community college, they already are armed with that knowledge of understanding that I'm in this pathway and I have it kind of laid out for me already, and I know which classes I need to take, so they don't get kind of sucked into a black hole of, we've seen the students who take a bunch of classes and none of them get them anywhere. So by creating a really well-structured pathway, it eliminates that, and it gives students that information that they need to be able to enter back into that pathway at any point along the process.
I think it's really kind of matching up and looking at what do we have at the community college that will match what's going on at the high school, or if we're developing a new pathway, we need to know where's it going to lead next. So I'm really big on stackable accomplishments and making sure that students are getting things along the way that could help them get a job if they did have to leave the pathway, right? But also, if I can capture them early, say with a certificate. So we have lower level certificates, like certificates of accomplishment. And that, it doesn't really, you're like, well, how do I use this? You can use this for jobs. It's proof to an employer that you have a specific set of skills, which is how I usually talk about certificates. But it's also kind of an early accomplishment. So for instance, a certificate of accomplishment, I have a program in alternative fuels and automotive technology. That student could achieve that certificate, low-level certificate, by high school graduation, in this case, in electric and hybrid vehicles. That's something a student can, it feels close, it feels doable, right? And then it's very easy to show them, well, if you just added a couple more classes, because this could get you the next level or certificate. And then they've really kind of developed that success, that feeling of success. The other thing I do in terms of like working with K-12 is we also look for what are other types of accomplishments. Can we add in digital badging? Can we look and see if there's any industry certifications that we could help students get along the way, right? And that's going to assist students if they did have to move out and kind of exit the pathway. But it makes it so much easier to help a student see things in a very clear way, where it seems it's not like, oh, you need to go to college for the next 6 years and get your bachelor's degree, right? They can see where in this career field, this is what I can accomplish at every step of the way. This is what my education or my training is going to get me. And then they can see clearly, hey, I can take that to the next step, right? And so I think that visuals, graphics, right? That really clear understanding of what you could accomplish with this particular certificate, that thing. The other thing is to look at certificates that you have, right? And try to figure out where are those certificates that students are really interested in a new pathway. So for instance, entrepreneurship is really big with students right now. A lot of students want to be their own boss, right? And so we have a certificate that was new in entrepreneurial studies. So now we're looking at new pathways, right? But we're connecting them to what's happening at the college.
Yeah, and that's something I would say, whenever either a K-12 or the college is looking at developing a new pathway, include your partners. So that's something that Colleen and I have really worked over the last couple of years, that whenever a new pathway is brought up at the high school, at the college level, she calls me and says, hey, which schools do we have in this that have a program like this? Is this something that's happening on the K-12 side? And vice versa. So we had a bunch of schools that were putting in entrepreneurship pathways, and immediately we reached out to the community college and they said, we are just creating an entrepreneurship certificate. So we were able to kind of bridge those together on the creation side, instead of, the old model, I used to say was, we would work in silos where the K-12 would build their pathway and the college would build their pathway. And then we come together and realize that there is no match and they don't work together. So then someone's going to have to retool something. Whereas when we started building our pathways together and keeping each other in mind in the development process, our pathways come together much more seamlessly. And there's more of a connection for the students as they progress on that pathway journey. So it's really important that as you're developing these pathways, that you do bring your partners in mind from the get-go. It's just going to make for a better thought out and developed pathway.
And that includes your industry partners. I mean, we're looking at, for instance, at one school, we were looking at their computer science program and it was kind of all over the place. And we're like, where's the focal area in here? And so, we begin to try to think, we're like, well, we could go in this direction with this. And then we have couple industry partners sitting on that development group. And they're like, what I need is data scientists. I can't find enough people who have this kind of background. And then we're suddenly like, okay, where at this particular school, there's a lot of industry involvement around that school. And now we know what it is they're looking at. And we were just in the process of trying to focus this particular program. And so there's a lot of excitement into, can we take this new area that there's a lot of demand in, and that El Camino was just starting a program in, and try to work with a pathway where we were already looking at of trying to find a focal area. That's the advantage of having the industry partners at the beginning. Otherwise, we would have built something out that we thought was great. And we thought that we knew, that this was a really high growth, and then not know that in our backyard, our industry partners were looking for something slightly different.
Yeah, so kind of diving into the taking interest, taking an inventory for the K-12 side, one of the key things to look at is your staffing. So anyone on the K-12 side knows that credentialing is always a hurdle. So look at your existing courses. Think outside of the box for credentials. A lot of teachers do have past industry experience. So either looking at doing, a survey of teachers and finding out who has other experiences, looking to see, do a credential inventory and see what credentials people actually have. I know in the district that I'm housed, they did that, and we were kind of surprised at some of the credentials that came up that we had no idea, because that wasn't where that person was being utilized, but they had that extra credential in their back pocket. And so just kind of looking to see what's already there with your staffing, and keeping in mind what's the capacity for growth, right? If you have a teacher who's already fully tapped out and you want a program to grow, what does that mean in terms of your staffing allotment? And can you afford for that program to grow an entire staff member, or is it something where you're going to need to plug some gaps as it grows because you can't yet afford to hire an entire staff member for that pathway? And so those are some of the things to look at with your staffing on the K-12 side. The other one is student interest and student enrollment. So one, where are the students already enrolling? And then also take an inventory of what the students are interested in. Because I like to say, just because, like, if you build it, they may not come. If students aren't interested in it, it doesn't matter how much work or money or shiny things you've put into this pathway. If it's not in their interest area, they're not going to enroll. And so you really need to keep in mind the interest as you're developing these pathways. So with that, I've built out a student interest survey. I put the link in the chat. And so this is one that you can kind of take to see. It's a pretty simple and quick one. But just to kind of show, so it has the different industry sectors with some of the examples of the jobs. Again, students don't always understand. I mean, we as adults in this don't always understand what's under that industry sector umbrella. So putting some examples there, a student can click on whatever area they're interested in, and then it takes them to the next one that kind of dives down deeper into the pathways. So on the K-12 side, we have industry sectors, and then within each of those industry sectors, we have pathways. And so, we want the pathway has to be aligned within one of those industry sector pathways. And so it's fine. A lot of people say like, oh, we want education and child development. Well, that's great, but what pathway in that are you going to explore? And so if you have a survey that lets you let students tell you, are they more interested in maybe family and human services that might lead to kind of social work or advocacy kind of work? Or are they interested in like being a teacher? This can kind of tell you, even within that industry sector, how to narrow it down into a pathway. And so it's giving you that data. This is built out so that it lets students choose two if they want. So if they have two areas of interest, they can even say, I'm not interested in anything else if they want to. It'll take them, before they submit, it lets them type in an option for something else if they didn't see it. And this is a lot of times students, we all know K-12 students especially, they may not read the whole survey. So this is where you'll get like, I want nursing, even though that was an option, right? But this lets them get to that quicker, and then you still have that data. It's not in the lovely, neat little survey form, but at least you're still getting that input. So this is what I call the, the catch-all for the students who didn't read. They still can put in what they're interested in being, even if it is in one of those pathways that they already saw. And then, so that link to take the survey is in the chat. And then I've also given you access. So there's I'm putting in the chat now, if you want to see the results. And so this is the sample survey that shows the results from what I just, is it going to go? Nope. Okay, here, we'll do it this way. Oh, it's because I have the title pasted too. All right. There we go. Sorry, it's been a while since I've had to teach on Zoom. It's amazing how quick that leaves you. So when you're done and you look at the responses, it gives you kind of nice little graphics so that you can see the areas that students are selecting. So you can see the industry sectors. And then under each of the industry sectors, it gives you the pathway breakdown of where students are interested. So with that link that's in the Zoom chat, you have access to all of the questions. You can take it and make a copy of it for your own use. If you start editing the one that's there, you're going to edit it for everybody. But if you want to go up here and you can make a copy of this, and so then it's your survey and you can edit it as you please. For example, if you know that you have zero capacity for ag, especially a lot of our inner city type areas, if you know you don't have the capacity for anything in ag, remove those questions from your student survey. Or if it's something to where, hey, we just want to see, we don't really care what it is, we just want to see what the students are interested in. All of the industry sectors and pathways are here in the survey, and so feel free to take it and make a copy of it and then edit it. If someone goes in there and starts making copies or starts editing and you lose it, feel free to email me and I'll send you a clean copy of it that you can edit and change. But this is something that really I think is underutilized, but really so key is getting that student interest. And then one of the things that you will undoubtedly find, as Colleen mentioned, just because the students are interested in it doesn't mean it's going to be a high growth, high wage, high demand industry sector. And so this is really where cross-sector work comes in. And this is where working with your college partners, working with your industry partners, in the real world, in real industry, cross-sector work is so much more prevalent than it is in our coursework when we're following standards and things like that. So looking for opportunities for cross-sector work. One of the big ones that I highlight is especially in the cosmetology and the fashion design realm. You're going to have those are always areas of high student interest, whether it's barber or makeup artist or hairdresser. Those are always high student interest areas. Those are not high demand, high growth, high wage industry sectors per the labor market data. There's lots of data to suggest otherwise, but as an industry sector umbrella, it's not deemed a high growth, high wage sector. But when you talk to students about what they want to do in that industry, most of them want to own their own shop. They want to be their own boss. And so you can then implement that cross-sector work and say, great, you're interested in cosmetology, but you're also interested in being your own boss. Let's merge these together and have an entrepreneurship pathway that looks through the lens of cosmetology, right? So you're still getting that student interest in there and you're bringing them in because they want that cosmetology piece. But then the course content work and kind of the industry sector that you're really focusing on is also that entrepreneurship. And so by doing that cross sector work and having it really kind of be that 50-50 marriage of those two industry sectors, you can code it and have it live in that entrepreneurship bubble, but still have a lot of that content be in the cosmetology, which is the student interest area. And so this is where, don't rule anything out, because almost anything can be an option when you're looking through that cross sector lens. And then the last one is equipment and facilities are often seen as a barrier. And just pointing out, there are lots of grants and funding sources that are designed specifically to facilitate the acquisition of equipment, the changing or building of new facilities. So if you find something that has all of the pieces in place and it's high growth and high wage and the kids are interested and it's ready to go, but you don't have the equipment or the facilities, don't let that stop you. There are other ways that you can get those pieces in place so that they're not barriers.
So in terms of leveraging what you have, we talked a little bit about those kind of stackable, using the certificates of achievement and stuff, trying to figure out, one of the things that Kim and I did at the beginning when we were talking about was this whole crosswalk in terms of trying to match up what we had at the community college side versus what was at the K-12 side, right? And kind of trying to see where the matches were and where there was, there weren't, right? And so what do we have already? Because if we're going to leverage what we have, we need to know what we already have at the K-12 side and what we have at the community college side to try to see where there's some linkage there. So we're trying to look for those places where there's a natural bridge. We're trying to look and see at the college side what things can students achieve through certificates typically, because that's stackable for them to see kind of what's the next step there. Then we're looking at, as Kim was saying about equipment and facilities. For instance, right now we're working on a commercial music pathway, right? And so what kind of equipment, this is, equipment, software is incredibly important in this pathway, right? And we don't want to have students do something at the high school and then come to the college and the college doesn't have what they're used to, right? Or vice versa, right? We may want to try to beef up what's at the high school, but because there are grants like the K-12 Strong Workforce, asking faculty and even industry, what's the expectation? What do students need to know? Then we can put in those kinds of requests to get whatever type of equipment we might need for that particular pathway. Sometimes we have pathways where we're working on it and the schools don't have those facilities. Like in terms of, I have the alternative fuels auto tech pathway. Well, everybody has gotten rid of those facilities typically, or construction. So a lot of the stuff that's in the trades area, those are some of the pathways where we have students coming to campus at the college side, so that way students are really interested in that pathway, get that opportunity on campus, and we can use what the college has, right? The other thing we're looking at is dual enrollment and high school articulation. And you really need to work with your college partner, because some colleges have a different emphasis on some things. At my campus, El Camino is not really big on articulation, but the high schools are constantly asking for articulation. And so, knowing that I'm not going to get a whole lot of support at my college for articulation, I'm trying to see whether or not we can do those courses as dual enrollment. One thing that we found that was really smart before I started, before with the engineering pathway, is that we had both. We had articulation agreements, but the courses were being taught as dual enrollment. And that was a great kind of safety net, because those students that for whatever reason didn't get fully enrolled under dual enrollment, but they took the class and they did all of the work, we were able to get them the college credit through articulation. So it became kind of the safety net, right? One of the other things that El Camino did, our dual enrollment coordinator, worked with our deans to create what she called the menu, right? And they identified courses that could be offered through dual enrollment that also met A to G, qualifications. And so, and that these were courses where at the college, we knew we had the faculty and the buy-in from the division to offer those courses. So those were courses where our deans were already very supportive, and they said, yes, we have adjuncts, we can offer those through dual enrollment. And so we were able to work with high schools and at the very least present them this list of, here are some of the classes that we know we can easily offer as dual enrollment, and we know we've got buy-in from our deans, and we know we have faculty, so we have capacity. So we kind of talk about ordering on the menu and ordering off the menu, right? So what are those courses that we would like to have, where we really need to create the buy-in on my end in terms of working with deans and stuff and the divisions, and just we want to make the request, is it possible to find the faculty in order to teach those classes? And then one thing, going back to something that Kim was talking about in terms of surveying your instructors and faculty at the high school, El Camino will approve high school teachers to teach dual enrollment if they meet the minimum qualifications. So for a school district to do a survey of their teachers to see what kind of degrees they have or level of industry experience allowed us to identify some high school teachers that met our college minimum qualifications for faculty. And that's been a really great way to kind of, for the high schools, they really like that because it's a sustainable model for them. They know that as long as they have that high school teacher, that they're going to be able to continue to offer these classes. They don't have to worry about whether or not there's a college faculty to teach it, or if something might happen that semester and somehow a class that they're counting on and is in their master's schedule might get canceled. So high schools really would prefer to have their teachers teach dual enrollment if they meet the minimum qualifications. So we've now developed a process at El Camino that allows us to review qualifications, but that survey of teachers in the district was really key to that. That will allow us to do more of it. And I think you might be surprised at the teachers in a district who have amazing qualifications, or they have a lot of industry background, and they easily qualify for the minimum qualifications for a community college instructor. So some programs, our pathway in engineering is entirely taught by high school teachers that meet minimum qualifications for engineering. And like I said, that program has about 17 high school teachers, all of whom had the qualifications, often in the industry background that they had. So it's just leveraging what you have, but also doing those kinds of surveys and identifying what you have, and then what might you need, like say in equipment or facilities, in order to make a really good, high quality, state-of-the-art pathway. You're on mute.
Thanks, Colleen. So these are kind of the elements to keep in mind with the first stage of pathway development. And so I'm putting a link in the chat for the Google Doc of this document. So again, go ahead and if you open it, make a copy. It's on view only. And then I think Linda's going to drop in the Word document. But for those of you who are Google savvy, if you open the Google Doc, go ahead and make a copy of it, because it is as a view only document. So go ahead and make a copy. And then it's your very own action plan template. Again, this was created by Centinela Valley Union High School District and El Camino College in partnership with Career Ladders Project. So a lot of work was done as they were developing and fleshing out their pathways. And so we've kind of created this action plan that walks you through these steps with your own institution and looking at these different components. And so the first one for pathway development is really kind of asking yourself some of these questions that we've talked about, and brainstorming what you already know or what you already have, and also brainstorming where can you go or who can you tap into for this information. So a lot of times this information isn't always housed in one spot within your institution. It may require going in and tapping into various different departments or different people within your institution to collect this information. And so, you know, who are those places, or where are those people or departments within your institution that are going to be able to answer some of these questions? And so, you know, what does the labor market data tell you? So brainstorm what you know now, and then also what do you still need to know, and who can you go to that might know that? If you're on the K-12 side, you know, you might say, I'm going to go to my community college person and ask them for their labor market data, because they're constantly updating their labor market data. If you're on the community college side, maybe you want to reach out and tap into Center of Excellence, or you know, maybe you want to call Linda, or maybe you want to come to the next workshop on the 24th and hear from Luke Meyer, and you know, have him walk you through the labor market data. But so really kind of walking you through the steps and walking you through these critical key questions that you need to ask yourself as you're going through this process. Does anyone have any questions, comments, wonderings, things that they want to throw out right now?
I just have a question. This is Tanaya, regarding what you both talked about with the industry partners. So do we look at specific criteria when we're choosing the industry partners? Are they partners that already exist? Can you just clarify that for me, please?
So my take on industry partners is, at the beginning, you can't be picky. It's really anyone in the industry who will call you back.
Okay. Okay.
At the beginning, once you get more developed and you have more established partnerships, then you can start maybe kind of differentiating. I know in Centinela Valley, we have different levels of partnerships. So we actually have platinum, gold, silver, and engagement partnership levels, and they involve different things. So platinum partnerships are partners that offer internships to students, right? So that's like the top tier of involvement. Gold, you know, is that they're on the advisory board, and that they come to those meetings. Silver is that they're willing to be a guest speaker and that they engage to answer questions. So like we have different tiers of partnership levels. But at the beginning, when you're kind of developing those partners, cast a wide net, and anyone who will call you back, latch onto them as a partner.
Yeah,
Okay.
and use your community college, because we have very active advisory boards, and a lot of our faculty have personal connections, a lot of them to industry. They already have those kinds of relationships. And so you can kind of get introduced, or we can invite them in, especially at the pathway development. Industry gets really excited to be, you know, part of that whole, how do we create this? What is your needs? I mean, that's a real win-win for industry partners, because they're getting a chance to say, look, here's what I need in terms of workforce and what I can't find. Can we create a pipeline, right? That's probably the best place to pull in your partners and kind of develop relationships. And so take advantage of your community college faculty and their different departments, because they may already have really good relations that we can invite in.
Awesome. Thank you. That helps a lot. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So hopefully you've had a chance to either download or make a copy of this document, but we found this really helpful when we go through our pathways, and again, both on the front end, but also as you continue to kind of cycle through, as you're making improvements or need to make adjustments. It's really the same kind of questions and the same ideas that keep cycling through. So once you've kind of laid the groundwork and in the development, and you've maybe identified the industry sector, you've identified the pathway that you want to move forward in, then comes the work of the alignment. And this is where you start taking those ideas and you start plotting them out on paper to kind of create this path. And so we call that program mapping, or pathway mapping. And so this is really where you're kind of putting it on paper and sequencing things out and connecting the dots. The biggest thing that we've learned is never map alone. So no one entity or institution should be conducting this mapping process on their own. You need those partners. So as you're mapping, as you're engaging in the map, you need the K-12 side, you need the community college side, and you need that industry side to make sure that you're really looking at the whole picture and that you're incorporating all of the elements. Otherwise, you're going to just have course sequences, right? And so as we said, course sequences are a great starting point, but they're not a pathway. So in order to kind of take it to that next level and make it a pathway, you need that partner involvement to round out your map.
And I would say on the community college side, I've made a real point that I have to have full-time faculty involvement in terms of creating that program mapping to meet. So we have faculty to faculty meetings in order to create a pathway map or a program map. And it's not just the teacher who's going to teach the dual enrollment class or something. Like, it needs to be someone who's a full-time faculty member so I can create buy-in. And I've always invite the dean as well. So whether they attend or don't, but yeah, that's been really, really important, because otherwise I can't get buy-in on the college side. So it's kind of a requirement of my pathway process. Besides, it builds a lot of excitement and relations between the K-12 and the community college.
Yeah, and that's where this faculty collaboration comes in. So you want the high school and the college together. And oftentimes what we've seen in the past is that it's leadership to leadership and the faculty gets left out. And so we found that starting on the ground level with faculty involvement is really the way to go, especially in terms of they understand the content standards and the skills. They understand what things need to go when, what needs to happen before something else. So really kind of locking those pieces in place, you need the faculty involvement. You need to know, if we're saying we want to do this particular thing in the capstone class, the faculty are the ones who are like, great, they need to have had that certification prior to that. So we need to build the certification into the prior class. Those kind of pieces that leadership levels often don't know or aren't aware of, the faculty is going to round that out and fill in those gaps. So it's really important to have that faculty collaboration piece. And then also the industry input. So likewise, as Colleen was sharing in that example, we had a pathway that we were working on and we were developing it. The instructors had this great idea of what they thought they wanted. Industry came in and said, we don't need that. Right? We need this other area. Can we focus a little more on that? So really making sure that your industry has that input piece as part of that process. And so I'm sharing an example of a pathway map. This is not the only pathway map example, but this is the one that Sentinel Valley and El Camino have worked together to use, again, with Career Ladders Project. But it just kind of shows you that, again, it's more than just a course sequence. So on one side, there's the course sequence kind of component to it, but then you have this whole other piece that really you're looking at what are the grade level outcomes and the skills and certificates at each grade level, what CTE standards are we addressing at each level. This may seem like a lot, and I will tell you it's taken years for the pathway maps to be this developed, but we were very happy that they were this thorough when it came time for an FPM, the Federal Program Monitoring Audit. And we had these pathway maps that had all of the standards, laid out for us. It made that process so much easier. So, the work up front will save you in the end, but this is one of those examples. And then, what are the work-based learning experiences that are tied in with each of these grade levels? Is there any integrated curriculum, which would be, cross-curricular activities or designs? And then what are the student supports that you're putting in there? One of the things that that El Camino has been great about is providing counseling support. They're outreach counselors, and they've specifically trained some of their counselors in the CTE pathways. And so those counselors come out to the schools with those pathways and host information sessions. They meet with students that have had, dual enrollment experience to kind of talk about continuing the pathway on. But so tapping into some of those student supports, both on the high school side, but also what are the student supports that the college offers that you can tap into at the high school level? One of the other pieces to focus on is looking at what are the post-secondary gateway courses. So what are those courses that are going to be the next step at the college level? Keeping in mind, you want to know, where does this pathway go, right? If a student finishes this pathway at the high school level, what is their next step at that college course, right? So what are those next step entry college course levels that they would take? What degrees or industry certifications are offered? And then what are those career opportunities? And so this is just kind of one of the places to put all of this information, right? You're really just, it's a housing place for information. And so this is where you can kind of put all of that down. It's a lot of information. And I will tell you, this document in and of itself is not for all audiences. So don't think that this is what you're going to share with all of your partners. This is really where the kind of the mapping process and writing it all down for the leadership team side. This is really kind of that component. I'm dropping a link if you're a Google person. Again, there's a link to this in a Google Sheets. And the one that's linked goes all the way down to 7th grade. So if you're a unified district and you have middle school as well, CTE can go all the way down to the 7th grade level. So your pathway can begin in the 7th grade level if you have those opportunities. And so here's an example of one that's filled out. And like I said, this is not for all audiences, right? If you're looking at this, this is a lot of information overload, but this is what those that are in the pathway use to kind of track their own pathway and to develop it to make sure that they have all the components. But it's not something that they would share with students or parents or even counselors. We have a pared down kind of counselor version, but it really is kind of a home where all of that information links. So we say, if the entire pathway team up and won the lottery tomorrow and like pieced out, we don't want the pathway to die because they won the lottery. We want it to continue. And so this is where kind of all of that information lives. And so you can kind of see everything that someone might need to understand that pathway or to implement it is here on paper. Here's another example. It's a little bit blurry. It's kind of laid out a little bit differently, but it's the same information. So they have, again, 7th through 12th, kind of the course sequences here. And then they have the college degrees and certificates that align here. And then what are the next steps at the college level? So the post-secondary steps fall in here. Linda?
Thanks, Kim. I just wanted to chime in because I thought you said something really important. And I think even for people that go back to watch this recording, is these documents are essential for having stability and long-term strength to your programs as you experience staff turnover, whether it be for promotions, you have people going into leadership roles at the district office, or just natural, now, we're going through a wave of retirements. You want there to be core documents that anchor all of your pathways in a sustainable model. And even on the college site, the same thing occurs, right? You have transitions. And so the more that these guiding documents exist, the better. And so I just wanted to emphasize that, Kim, because I thought that was a really important point in the strength of these documents.
Yeah. And then, there's different ways to leverage these for different audiences. So, here's one where this is one that we use with parents and students. And so it kind of is a nice, simpler way of lining out, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, kind of laying out the high school pathway, and then it takes on the next steps. So what are they going to look at when they go to college? And it has kind of the 3 additional classes that would be the next step at the college. And so, kind of taking that same information that's on your kind of what I called your crazy documents, but then, how do you then utilize that information to make it meaningful for different audiences and pulling out pieces of that. And so here's an example of one that we did where we took, the course sequencing or part of the course sequencing and the post-secondary components and made it into a nice little info table for the students and the parents to kind of see where that pathway went and how it connected to the community college. Colleen, you want to talk about?
Say, in terms of those pathway maps, one of the things that we did together is that in Centinela Valley, they were having a professional development day, kind of they had in January, and this was their leadership teams for their different pathways and academies. And so this time around, they invited us. So we were able to invite someone from our, faculty that was, aligned with the different pathways. There were other of us that attended, even somebody from outreach, like the director and staff were there. And so we were kind of at the table and able to answer questions like, well, what are your certificates that go in this, and what classes does this need to feed into? And it was really great to be both in the room and kind of have that invitation of the community college there. And while we didn't, we weren't providing input into that big complicated pathway map, because a lot of that work had already been done, the college input was kind of a really great way to where they are kind of looking at improvements or other sources of support. And so I thought that was great to just have the community college invited to be at the table for those different pathways that were at the high schools. So it generated a lot more buy-in for me as well to have my faculty attend different events that K-12 was doing.
Yeah, and it was great, having that faculty input, like things that we don't often think about is, what are the prerequisites to this pathway on the college side? And so having some of those identified and then realizing that as a district, that prerequisite was something that could be offered as dual enrollment to either, as an after school or over the summer or, in some other way, but that we could help facilitate that prerequisite during the high school years. So that way students who wanted to continue on would have that prerequisite out of the way and could just kind of dive into the pathway at the college level. So those kind of little pieces often get overlooked until you get everyone at the table kind of talking together. And those are really, really critical things and things that kind of take a pathway from just existing to being a really thriving pathway.
This map here in terms of, this is something I use at the college, and then I have on the back side, I have it listed with the courses in more of kind of a table format. But I really like having the graphics like this in terms of what's happening at the high school at each grade level. This one is the engineering technology program. We even put in an extra class that students could take over the summer. We had a machine tool technology class that was created specially for engineering pathway students. That happened over the summer that they could sign up for. And then it clearly shows you what's the certificate that this leads to. And in this case, we had a lower level certificate that was in mechanical engineering design technician, that by high school graduation, students who completed these courses, the course sequence, could actually get right before high school graduation, which it really grabs students' attention. And then we even included what kind of money can you make with either the certificate, or if you go all the way through the associate's of science degree in engineering technology. We kind of let well, you need this many more courses once you get to El Camino within the major. Obviously, you need general ed courses too. So that gave that stackable thing for students to be able to see, well, I accomplished this in high school, and wow, I only need 3 more classes for this either certificate of achievement or the associates or transfer, and also a transfer degree. And that just helps them kind of map it out. So any kind of visual you can give students, obviously the simpler the better, but include information like jobs and salary with that matches that level of education or training. Because we have a lot of students that say they want to go all the way through engineering school. We want to show them how they can. For instance, at El Camino, we have the South Bay Promise, which gives them 2 years of college free. Now we're just showing them, hey, look, you could do these 2 years here, accomplish this, get that associate's degree, and then move on to the university at the junior and senior level and as an engineering major. So just clear pathway maps for different audiences, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and I think too, from the high school side, having something like this laid out that's really easy, especially we know that students aren't great at long-term planning. So when you can give it to them in just like next step chunks, right? Like just focus on these next 3 classes, right? And just when we can kind of break it down into bite-sized chunks, we see that students are more likely to engage and stick to it and complete that next chunk rather than laying out a full 2-year plan, right? And so if we can say, you know, you've already got these classes towards the certificate, you only need these 2 additional classes, that's much more attainable for students, and it's easier for them to look at than looking at this huge list of courses that goes into a degree. So we've found that by kind of chunking it into these bite-sized stackable certificates, we get more student engagement and students are more willing to entertain that as a viable option, as opposed to students who are like, I can't, I'm just going to go work, I don't have time to go to college. When you can show them, look, just these 2 classes, and then when they are in those 2 classes, hey, look, just these couple more, and you get and that's where we found we're able to kind of get students who maybe didn't think college was an option, kind of get them through that process by doing these little chunks in the stackable certificates. Really will help students get further through the process than they would otherwise.
Yeah, and one of the other things that we noticed is that in terms of working with a lot of my different schools that had the engineering technology, a lot of the schools were missing like one course that was needed for the certificate. And they just didn't realize that, right? And so it was like, well, geez, all you need to do is add this one course in here and your students are going to be able to qualify for the certificate. And also a lot of students weren't taking that last class in the senior year, right? So there was a very small group of students that were making it all the way through. And so originally I was doing senior presentations, like going into senior high school presentations to tell them about an apprenticeship program that we had at El Camino and kind of what can you do next steps. And some of the teachers were like, hey, this would be really good for my 10th graders to hear, so that they'll actually stay in the pathway all the way to the end. So it's allowed us to, especially with schools that were missing a course, to really show them, hey, the course you're offering doesn't count towards the certificate, but if we switched it, it would.
So yeah, with those considerations, kind of with what Colleen was try to match your alignment and your pathway to stackable certificates and degrees, and really have that laid out so that you can see that progression, and where possible, matching to industry certifications and exams. It's never static, right? This should be an ongoing process where you are reviewing your pathway map, you're kind of revising it. Like, you know, Colleen's example is great, realizing that, hey, if we just added this one class, right? And so that's where looking at, you know, maybe if we added a summer school class option for our students to then qualify for the certificate. But, you know, kind of regularly reviewing your pathway map and your process and seeing what's missing, what's working, what's not, and what can be adjusted to better align between the institutions should be an ongoing process. And again, the focus on keeping it faculty driven. Faculty is really going to be the key in all of the stages of this, but making sure that if the faculty is on board and involved in the process of creating and aligning the pathway, it's just going to make everything that comes after smoother. So going back to the action plan, right, for our pathway map action plan, we have our pathway alignment section. And so this is, again, kind of brainstorming what you already know or what you have and what you still need, and then where can you go to fill in those gaps. So again, tapping into what different institutions or partners can you ask for different things, and maybe who's going to do that, or who is it that you're going to tap. Any questions, comments about this alignment process?
I just have a question again. Just for the completed mapping that you had on there, it was a little blurry. Is there a way that we can get a sample of that? Like a link for that?
Yeah, I can, if you email me, I'll link to a couple of the completed samples. And then we've been trying to find different examples of ways people do it. So I've got 2 or 3 samples, but yeah, we can put something together and kind of share out those examples of completed maps so you can see what they look like.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right. And yeah, again, kind of going back to that industry partner, cast that wide net. You know, I will say one of the pathways that that I work with, they kind of threw out a survey to students' parents, and they were able to tap into a lot of industry partners that they had been struggling to through parent resources, and realizing that you know, parents were in these industries, and because they were already tied to the school through their child, even if their student wasn't involved in that pathway, they were happy to give back and sit in an advisory session with one of the other pathways, because it felt like they were contributing something back to the school that their child attended. So, you know, be creative in how you tap into those industries, because those industry partners are everywhere. And you never know where you're going to find your champion partners. So, you know, don't just go through the kind of the normal channels of cold calling industry, but tap into the resources that you have. I've also had students where they do within their industry, they do kind of not during COVID, but pre-COVID, they would go out to local industries that matched their industry sector. And they had this nice little letter that they had written that explained what their pathway was and what they were asking. And they would go to local businesses and kind of introduce themselves and say, hi, I'm so-and-so from such and such high school, and I'm in this pathway, and this is what we do. And we would love it if you would attend. You know, we're hosting an event, and we'd love it if you could attend and maybe be involved in this pathway, and not really asking anything specific, but just kind of getting them to show up and seeing what the pathway had to offer. And then realizing like, oh my gosh, these students are amazing. I want to be part of this. And we've actually gotten a lot of local internships through that process, where we've tapped into local businesses who came to an event that the school was hosting, saw it in action, and said, how do I get some of your students? Right. And it went from just students dropping off a letter at an industry to providing internships. So, you know, really kind of be creative and look outside of the box when you're tapping into those industry partners.
And Kim, you've mentioned this before. We've discussed it as a key talent team. Another great leverage is the consultants that you currently have, the industry members working with your school district, and actually working with your executive cabinet to create a policy where there's sort of a give back to the school district for that contract. And we'll get into that. We have a workshop later this year on partnerships, but you could always email one, either Kim or I, to discuss that further if you'd like some ideas or templates around that policy.
Yeah, and I think Michael Dean is great. He's got a lot of knowledge on that also. But yeah, a lot of times it's written into contracts that nobody knows about. So leveraging some of those pieces that are already in existence in your districts that that maybe aren't being highlighted. All right, so implementation stage, this is where rubber meets the road, right? You've done the mapping, you've figured out all of the classes, you've got kind of the work-based learning pieces that you want to infuse, and now you have to put it into action. And so On the high school side, right, it's really kind of identifying who are your champions and your visionaries, and then who are the workers. Who's the primary point of contact, right? Who do we go to with questions? Who's like the tapped person that we're going to go to? The faculty support, again, is key, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. The logistics, working out what are going to be the procedures and the processes as we implement this pathway, what are timelines that are involved, and then what might be some of the problem solving that might come up. Colleen, you want to talk about from the college side?
Yeah, and I agree. It's kind of the same in that I am looking for who's enthusiastic at the college. If I'm starting, I really need, and even if we're trying to develop something new or I'm trying to build things, I need dean's involvement. I absolutely need to go through my deans. I need to get their buy-in. I need to find a faculty member who's enthusiastic and really, loves either working and teaching with high school students or just thinks this is really important. And so I absolutely need that at the college side in order to do any of the work. The other thing that has made all the difference is the world is K-12 districts that have a point of contact for the district, right? Ideally, if there's a point of contact for the district, it goes so much smoother. There's so many less problems because it's a lot of knowledge. And really, you really have to understand, especially dual enrollment. It takes a little while to really kind of get that expertise. If they're, also at the high school level, who is our one point of contact that we're going to go through in terms of collecting forms and solving problems? Who's going to be at that school that the college is going to work with? Without that, it could be really like, it's just the logistics and especially with dual enrollment, becomes a lot of work on teachers and counselors. And that's really kind of not fair because it's added on top of everything else they're doing. I don't want teachers to really kind of hate doing dual enrollment because they're doing so much paperwork and additional work. So having some kind of point of contact to help with that or identifying someone at the school. We invite our high school teachers that teach dual enrollment classes to our twice a year faculty orientations for all of our dual enrollment teachers. So whether they're high school or they're college, we do a faculty orientation twice a year. We're at the college, and you guys have been doing dual enrollment, know that it is really more complicated than we wish it would be, just the whole registration process. So at the college for El Camino, in the 3 years that I've been here, every semester gets a little bit better. We're constantly trying to tackle some kind of a stopping point or where there's problems or where students are kind of falling through. And so it's really working, another big piece is that, say our admissions office wants it done one certain way, and they're like, well, they're college students, so they should do it this way. And if they can't handle it, then they shouldn't, they won't get the credit. And it's kind of a very, they don't really get the side of, hey, we're training students on how to be successful college students. And so the K-12 gives us feedback and says, yeah, what you're telling us to do, that's not going to work. That's not going to work on our end. And so we're really trying to constantly streamline. We had hoped we'd have an online dual enrollment form by now. It hasn't happened yet. And so it's just still a very manual process. And then problem solving, right now, it's all about registration and making sure that students are fully enrolled. And so it's really kind of problem solving at the student level, which is why that somebody at the K-12 at the high school level or at the district level becomes so important. Otherwise, you end up with a lot of students who don't get credit that they really deserve to get for the work that they're doing. But for whatever technical reason, their application didn't get processed or something.
Yeah, and with the problem solving, again, kind of the importance of faculty. So again, kind of going back to the commercial music pathway that Colleen mentioned earlier, one of the things that the faculty recognized was that the high school and the college were using two different types of software, and that if we wanted to align our programs, someone was going to need to change. And we all know equipment and software can be very costly. So it was one of those things to where, we then said, okay, what's the timeline for this? What grant cycles are coming up and what are the deadlines for those? And so then it was asking faculty, hey, if you can identify what materials you need and what kind of software by this date, we can get it into this grant for this round, which would then take place then. Does that work for our timeline? And so, again, faculty in identifying those barriers is really key, because they're, again, the ones that are on the ground with implementation and are going to be the ones that see kind of those hiccups. But then kind of working through the logistics of, okay, if this is a hiccup, how can we solve that? How can we work around, and what are our solutions for that?
And that really adds into your industry partner being there at the beginning too, because, then we have industry who's stepping up and saying, oh, well, we can get this software. This company is willing to either donate, provide financial assistance, or even something as a discount within terms of getting that kind of software or something like that. And so a lot of times they will chime in and, provide you support or, even fiscal assistance to get something that you wouldn't have had even thought to ask for.
Yeah. So kind of going back to, how key faculty is, and kind of keeping with that commercial music, one of the things that we realize is that at the high school, the commercial music pathway is still growing and it's relatively small. And so looking at those software licenses, they didn't qualify for an institutional license because there weren't enough of them. But one of the college faculty said, well, what if you just added on to our license? And we shared our licensing. And so that was something, again, leveraging those faculty partnerships to where then we were able to do like a cost share and kind of work out, well, if we use this many, how many is that adding on? And so it was able to get the discounted cost for the high school by partnering with the college. And then they were all the idea is that then they'd all be using the same software so that those programs would align better. But that came out of the faculty talking and just kind of brainstorming of like, well, why don't we just do this together? So again, faculty is really key as the driving point. And so with faculty, that's something to consider when you're recruiting or hiring. One, making sure that you have someone with the right credentials and certifications, which can be a challenge. But also making sure that when you hire that person or when you're recruiting them, that they know what they're signing up for. So especially on the K-12, we know that, teachers just get assigned what they're teaching. And so if you're assigning a teacher into a pathway and they're not on board and bought in and already kind of excited about this, it's not going to make for a smooth implementation. So you really want to make sure that the faculty that you're onboarding and that you're bringing into this pathway are on board and excited about this and kind of know what the pathway is doing and designed to do and where it's going. So that way you have that buy-in from the start, because that's really going to kind of make or break that early implementation phase.
And that's huge on the community college side. If we don't find the right faculty who enjoy working with this age and population, who are enthusiastic, and just have that kind of really engaging and active, instructional method of teaching, that's going to be like, it could actually be damaging to have the wrong faculty in a dual enrollment class that just kind of turns off students. So it's really important for the college to identify the right kind of person who has the personality and the enthusiasm. And then the other thing is, in terms of dual enrollment, the college, some of the deans have now starting to do is look for adjuncts that want to teach dual enrollment. And we then have a consistent faculty member who's with our pathway and teaches our dual enrollment classes. And that's been really great. We've had some really great faculty that way. So that's been something that's changed at the college.
Yeah, and then supporting the faculty in problem solving, it's really important that faculty know when a problem arises or when there is a hurdle, who do they go to tell that to? So identifying that kind of point person of who's there to support the faculty in implementation. And it may not be the same person who would support them if it were just a regular class, but really who's going to support them in this pathway idea and in the implementation of the pathway program, which means, who's supporting them with work-based learning, who's supporting them with skill attainment and any certifications, who's supporting them if there is dual enrollment or articulation, who's the support for that, but really identifying who are those support people that are there for the faculty member. So faculty knows that they're not responsible for this lift all on themselves, right? That there are supports built in to support the faculty and the pathway as a whole. And then, oh, go ahead, Colleen.
I was going to just say is that this is really important. I've had high school teachers in, a pathway who were teaching through dual enrollment, had the qualifications, and that because of typically the registration process or students getting, credit, that kind of admissions piece was such a hassle for them and so much extra work. I've had teachers just step out and say, I'm not doing dual enrollment. I'm sorry, I'm not doing this. I'm not getting paid extra. And this is so much extra work for me. And that's typically been in a school where there's not somebody who is kind of that liaison and that support function. And so it's really important that we're not just piling more onto the teacher or even at the college instructor, like kind of that's my role to be supportive of the college instructor for the same reason, because I want them to focus on their class. So, districts need to be careful. They'll have teachers that step out of dual enrollment. And I've lost several teachers who just, no longer want to do it anymore. And that's means their students don't get college credit, which is not good.
Yeah, and even just pathway in general, you'll see teacher burnout is a real thing. And if you're not putting in the supports to support a teacher in the pathway implementation, those teachers are going to burn out. So it's really important that when you're talking about implementation, even though so much of it is on the faculty in terms of implementing this pathway and these courses, you really need to make sure that you have those supports for the faculty so that you don't burn that faculty member out. You don't have that consistent turnover, and that you still have people who are bought into and excited about the pathway. And then that kind of goes with, faculty evaluation and debriefing. Evaluation, not of the faculty themselves, but the faculty kind of evaluating the implementation, right? What's working, what's not. Debriefing, what are the challenges, what are the areas for improvement, what's missing, but making sure that you have that kind of check-in with the faculty in that implementation stage of what's working, what's missing, what's not working, and what do we need to edit, and keeping in mind that the faculty is going to be your best piece of information for that. They're going to have the greatest knowledge set of how implementation is going. So that's our implementation section. Any questions on kind of this piece of the puzzle? All right. So the last piece is the pathway improvement. And this is, once you've implemented, kind of taking stock. Colleen, you want to talk about kind of what we've done here?
Yeah, one of the things that the college started doing is we do an annual data report from our institutional research office on our dual enrollment classes, and literally breaking down student success, course success rates, right, by class, like really diving deep into by class. What's the success rate? Retention is not an issue with dual enrollment classes that are at a high school when it's part of the school day. So we have incredible success rates, our retention rates. So that's never been an issue. But the other thing this did for us was this annual data report really helped me to get buy-in at the college, right? Really let folks who didn't think high school students could handle their level, their college content, really kind of, help make the case or with deans who are not really supportive, able to show, man, students are actually succeeding in your college class at higher rates than your college students. And so I've actually had faculty, I had one faculty member just kind of throw the report on the table, like, I don't even get these results with my college students. And I'm like, well, it's apples and oranges here. High school pathway students have a much higher level of support. They have support at the school and from the college. So that's been really helpful to do that, but it also has helped us identify any classes where they weren't being successful, where students weren't having good passing rates. And it also let us look at student achievement data. So looking at, and are there gaps in student achievement, either by ethnicity or gender, and that was probably one of the most motivating things for me out of that data personally, which really built my own buy-in and just like, I need to spread the word kind of thing, in that there were very small achievement gaps. In fact, our students of color were doing better than their peers in terms of Asian and white students. And usually I'm crying when I see student achievement data, and it's constantly these huge gaps. And it's just like, why aren't we making progress here? But dual enrollment is actually really important for students, and they tend to do, especially our students of color, do even better a lot of times, and their rates of going to college are really higher because they've taken a dual enrollment class. So we use that data everywhere we can. I mean, I have that data report in my bag all the time. I whip it out. And then, Kim was talking about that feedback at the end in terms of teachers and the college faculty that are teaching dual enrollment having a chance to give us feedback back in terms of what's working and what's not. That's been really, really important, because it also creates the teachers and the faculty really feel like somebody's listening to them. And then we can identify problems that we may not have even known were happening. So if I get that feedback from the K-12 side, I can go back to the departments or the division, or look at the process and try to figure out a solution to make it more streamlined or work better for both partners. And then, just like I said, assessing outcomes. So for example, I have two models of K14 pathways, really, even kind of three models. You have the school day dual enrollment courses that are embedded in an existing academy or a pathway at the high school. That is our most successful model. That is the students that really succeed at very high rates. And of course, retention is not an issue because it's part of their academy at the school. Then we have after school classes that are taught at the high school or online that are kind of individual dual enrollment classes, or even a pathway that's kind of almost like a supplemental pathway, but it's based out of the school. Not as successful as school day. And then one model that I've spent a lot of time in was creating these K14 pathways that were the college based, right? Where a student from any district could join that pathway, but it's still an after school model. It's still voluntary. It's still something on top of their high school thing. And you know what? I'm really rethinking this model in this because of the data in terms of looking, in this case, the retention rates for the students. Are they making it through? Because our pathways are 2-year pathway, right? Are they getting through to the second year? And actually, we were doing a really good job of bringing students into the pathway, and those first 2 courses would be really good in terms of the numbers of students in the pathway. But by the time they got to the 3rd class, it would go down dramatically. And I was seeing that across the board for all of those pathways. So now I'm having to use that data and start thinking about that model, like, what is going on here? Do I need to up the student support piece of it? Will that make a difference? And so this year, I'm going to try to embed more student support, try to do more community building, or do I need to put this model to the side and just focus more in on school day pathways? Because those are the pathways where I see the best for student, student success rates and stuff. And so that data is informing even the model that I'm using in terms of the partnerships that we have with schools. And, I have to admit, students are extremely busy. They have jobs, they have sports, they have a lot even on top of their daytime high school classes. So, but the data is what's informing those decisions in terms of improvements.
So we're going to look at kind of a case study of one of our pathways that we made some changes to. We used some data and we made some changes to. And some of the changes that we made, we identified a singular point person for the enrollment process. So this is a dual enrolled pathway. And so we made that change. We performed an internal CalPADS audit to increase CTE completion rates. So we found that not all of our pathways were coded correctly and in the sequencing, as well as coding with dual enrollment as well. So we were getting some wonky dashboard numbers. So we did a CalPADS audit to kind of strengthen that. We increased parent communication. We identified those missing courses. So like Colleen said, there were some times where we just needed to add a course to make a certificate complete. So identifying those courses. We worked with El Camino to remove Social Security numbers from the dual enrollment paper application, which changed results drastically. And we allowed for student forms to be sent electronically. So before there was a secure process to transfer forms between institutions, and we were able to get that to become an electronic process. And so we're going to look at kind of what happened with that. But first, so we're looking at data from it's Hawthorne High School, and this is their Manufacturing and Engineering Academy. So this has been a California Partnership Academy since 2001, and the pathway itself started, I believe, in '98. So this is a very long existing pathway. There's over 4 feeder elementary districts. So this is not a unified district. So they're taking students from various district feeder schools, and over 60% of the students are deemed at risk. And so you can kind of see some of the stats here. They mirror the district and LA County in most of these areas. The only kind of anomaly is their EL rate, but you can see that their redesignation percentage is significantly higher. And this is looking at students from 9th through 12th grade. So students within the academy have a significantly higher redesignation rate than their counterparts, but all of the other numbers are pretty close. And so this is some of the data that we looked at. So we looked at their percent participation in the dual enrollment process. So we had the data that said the students that were dual enrolling were achieving very well, but then we started to look and see that it wasn't a lot of students. There were huge gaps in their participation. And so, as Colleen mentioned, we had dual enrollment and articulation available for this pathway. And even utilizing both of those measures, we only had 62% one year, 57% the next. Before that, we didn't have data collected on the district side, but we knew we had relatively low participation in attaining college credits for these classes. And so that was something that we wanted to adjust. So what we did was we implemented a single point of contact for the student enrollment process. So no longer would it be up to the teachers. So it was going to be taking that off of the faculty plate, and no longer was there going to be an El Camino kind of counselor that came in once to kind of do that and then left. So we kind of switched it. So there was one single point of contact who really was going to follow through the entire process. The Social Security numbers were removed from the paper application, which enabled students of all citizenship areas to participate. Even though that was already allowed, they weren't engaging in the process because even just seeing that on the form stopped them from completing the paper application. So by removing that, enabled them to complete the application process. We increased parent communication so they understood what was going on and why it was important for them to sign these forms and to engage with their students. And then we also increased the training for the college counselors in terms of understanding the sequencing and understanding really what the pathway was about. And we can see that when we implemented these changes between the 17-18 and the 18-19 school year, we have a drastic jump in students participating in just dual enrollment. So this is just separating out dual enrollment from articulation. We went from 57% participating in both dual enrollment and articulation to 80% participating in just dual enrollment. And so we were able to kind of engaging in this process and looking at what some of the pitfalls and some of the roadblocks were. We were really able to adjust our outcomes by just making some small adjustments on the adult side, made huge impact for the students. And kind of a side note in this, we went from having 0 students completing the certificate that El Camino offers to the first year that it became eligible, we had 16 that applied for and were able to get their certificate from El Camino. So that was also exciting to be able to see students graduating from high school with a college certificate just from these little changes. So this kind of is where we wrap up. So the kind of key questions that we ask ourselves in these, right? What is our labor market communicating? What is our program mapping going to look like? Who is going to be involved in identifying the issues and developing solutions? And then what student data do we already have or can we collect to define success or to monitor our success? And so hopefully with this action plan, this will help you walk through that process. Are there any questions on the improvement side of things? Any questions on that component? The one thing I will say is that as educators, we are great at collecting data, and we have data coming out of our ears. We're not always great at using it, right? And so this is one of those things, you have all of this data. You're not going to have to do anything extra to collect the data. It's just really identifying what data are you going to use and how are you going to use it. Don't reinvent the wheel. We have the data, it exists, it's already there. It's just creating the mechanisms to tap into it and using the data so that way we're using it for something that's good and meaningful. All right, well, thank you all. I hope that you were able to at least get some resources that can help you engage in this process and using, feel free to use everything that we've shared. When we email out the recording, we'll make sure that the presentation is there also, because all of the links are also embedded in the presentation. So that way, if you missed something or you didn't quite get them all, you'll have them all there. But hopefully this was helpful and useful for you, and you were able to gather some resources to help you on your journey.
And
Thank
feel
you,
free
Kim.
to contact me. I put my email in the chat. So if you have questions kind of in terms of the community college side or anything in that area, feel free to contact either Kim or I.
Thank you, Colleen and Kim. You guys did a fantastic job. It was a great professional development.